Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 13 on the American West. Now this one, ladies and gentlemen, is about the homesteaders. Now, as we saw in a previous video, the homesteaders did have a huge impact on the Great Plains. This video will look at the problems that they faced and, more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, some of the solutions, some of the answers. Now, an old song, there are more questions than answers, but not in this case, because as we will see in this video, ladies and gentlemen, they did begin to solve quite a few of the problems. Now, if you remember back to video number 9, check it out if you've forgotten, the homesteaders faced a huge amount of problems. I used this in video number 9, farming, to help us. They did face many problems. There they are. Now, the ones we're going to concentrate on today: the machinery, the dryness, the arid conditions, and the isolation. 3 major problems. As we will see, together with no wood, some of these were solved, and how they were solved we will see in this video, ladies and gentlemen. So, many people took up the challenge of being a homesteader. Why? Well, there were many reasons for this. Let's have a look at a couple of them. First one, the chance of a new life in a new country, or the chance of a new life moving from a different part of the country where they had a tough life, for example in the eastern side of the USA. Or people were persuaded by advertising, by posters, which didn't really tell the truth. They didn't show the reality of how difficult life could be for homesteaders. Put those together and we see that thousands and thousands of people moved to the plains to live a new life as a homesteader. Remember, the Homestead Act said you only needed $10, 10 of these, ladies and gentlemen, to file a claim. Now that is true, but in reality, you needed much more than $10. You needed hundreds of dollars, maybe $800, $1,000. For example, you've got to buy your machinery to help you farm effectively. So it's true that the homesteaders faced many problems. How were these problems solved? Now, let's have a look in the rest of this video. The first one, choo-choo, the railway. Once they began to link America together, crossing the Great Plains with the railroad, it became easier to visit friends, family, so this would immediately reduce the isolation. The railroad also made it easier to bring materials from the east, particularly heavy machinery. Important export and import companies were set up. For example, the Sears Roebuck Company back in Chicago over towards the eastern side, and they were able to move machinery where the homesteaders were living on the Great Plains using the railroad. That is making the life of the homesteader a little bit more easy. Also, as the railroad developed, new towns developed along the route. Therefore, this is decreasing the isolation because you don't have to travel as far to the next settlement to get help or machinery or supplies. So less isolation and a new market for the products. If more people are moving there and new towns are starting, that's a place where the homesteaders might be able to sell their product. So the railway was the first big solution for the homesteaders. The second one, new technology, new inventions. And there are at least 3 or 4 of these new inventions, and that's what I'm going to explain in this part of the video. The first invention is the windmill. A big windmill, a big fan. turning round and round and round. Well, what did that help? Any ideas? Well, new drills were developed so they could go deep underground, drilling underground, because that's where the water was. And then they could pump the water from under the ground to the surface. And what's going to power these pumps to get the water? The wind power. So these windmills appeared on the Great Plains. The extra water. We all need water, ladies and gentlemen. Cheers. Beautiful. Water is important for all of us. And of course, the homesteaders, the farmers, were able to use the water to make the soil better for their crops, more fertile, more crops, easier to grow, more to sell. Profit. Irrigate the fields. So by getting the water, they're able to irrigate the fields, grow more crops. And what got the water? The windmills, the fans turning round and round and round. So this was a key invention. Reminds me of that old joke. Windmill number 1 says, "Do you like Aston Villa?" Windmill number 2, "Yes, I'm a big fan. Way!" Sorry about that terrible joke. But windmills were important. 1854, we get the Halliday self-governing windmill. Well, that's a posh name. What does it mean? Simple. The windmill would change direction to catch the wind. So there's always a supply of power. So these windmills made things better. But there were still problems. Not very effective, 30 feet, 10 meters or so below the surface. Also, the early windmills had wooden blades. They could often break in the strong winds which blew across the plains. From about the 1870, the wooden sails were replaced by steel blades, which was better. Also, of course, you had to maintain your windmill. You had to climb up fairly regularly to oil the machinery. So you had to have a good head for heights. It was a tough life, but the windmills begin to help the homesteaders make more profit. By 1880, the windmills had solved the problem of a lack of water. So that's the second effort. Railways, windmills. The third one, barbed wire. Now we all know what barbed wire is. We've seen it fencing off, protecting buildings, etc. How did that help solve the problems for the homesteaders? Remember, there was a problem of lack of wood. The railway did help to some extent because they could bring some wood from the east. But still more was needed to fence the land, to protect the crops. The answer came in 1874. A farmer from Illinois over in the east, up by Chicago, a man called Joseph Glidden. He patented, developed a new successful version of barbed wire. Why was this better? Well, it was quick to put up. Eventually it became quite cheap after about 1880. It worked very well. There was a market. The homesteaders needed protection, protecting their land. They didn't get enough wood, so therefore barbed wire was their answer. It was so successful that Glidden became a millionaire. There was a good market for barbed wire. A shortage of wood. Barbed wire helps. Shortage of wood. If you remember, they didn't even have enough wood for their houses. People used the soil, the earth, sods of turf to actually make their homes. They were called sod houses. Often they were very dark, uncomfortable, but at least they worked. It was a place to live. If they didn't have wood, they would live in earth houses. That just shows the shortage of wood, which barbed wire helped. Secondly, there wasn't even enough wood for fuel to burn. It was too valuable to burn. Therefore, women and children would go round on the plains collecting chips, or dried buffalo dung, which they called chips, and they burnt that. Smelly, but it worked. That just shows the shortage of wood. A problem for the homesteaders, barbed wire begins to solve it. Railways, windmills, barbed wire. But there were other inventions. Number 4, the ploughs, new machinery to turn over the soil. The Great Plains, ladies and gentlemen, the ground was very tough, often not much rainfall. The grass was very tough, weeds, hard ground for the homesteaders to dig through, difficult to plough. The answer? Well, muscles, but that's very tiring. The real answer? New technology, new ploughs, developed by a man called John Deere. He begins to develop a steel plough which cut through the ground more easily, which was obviously better. After 1875, a new sit-on steel plough called the sulky plough, so you could sit on it and go along. Now that was so successful, in the first 6 years, 50,000 were sold. That shows that the homesteaders were desperate for this new invention. Obviously, it's making their life better. But there were problems. Number 1, it was very, very expensive. Remember, it was invented by a man called John Deere. Expensive, people may have said, oh, it's too much money. It's a bit too dear. Sorry. Occasionally, the sulky plough, the sit-on plough, would tip over. Dangerous. Also take more time. By 1880s, the ploughs were better, more reliable, they could churn the ground easily, and they weren't too expensive. So ploughs were another solution to the homesteaders' difficult life. And the final one, a new type of crop. Remember, parts of the Great Plains had a shortage of water. Not much rainfall, very, very dry, arid conditions. A new group of immigrants, people who moved into America and settled on the Great Plains, called the Mennonites. They originally came from Russia. The land where they came from in Russia was very similar in climate and type to the Great Plains. The Mennonites, this new group, brought their own wheat with them called Turkey Red. It grew very well in Russia. It also grew very well on the plains. It was suited to the climate. Tough grass, not much rain. It grew well. Therefore, the homesteaders would have more of a crop to sell, make more money, buy more equipment. Can you see how it all links together, ladies and gentlemen? If people are seen to be succeeding, that would attract more farmers. So this new type of crop, a new type of farming called dry farming, which conserved the rainwater, trapped the moisture in the ground, this was a success. Better use of the water, more crops, more profit. So we see, through technology, through inventions, many of the problems that the homesteaders faced were solved. One final point, ladies and gentlemen, just before we finish. The government help, their aim was to encourage further settlement on the plains. 1862, the original Homestead Act, was based on 160 acres. Now that worked well in the east where there was lots of rain. Didn't work quite so well on the plains where there was less rain. So they needed a new law. Almost 10 years later, 1873, the Timber Culture Act. The idea was a good one. The idea was this: give homesteaders another 160 acres for free. Didn't need any money. A gift, a present. here's another 160 acres. If the homesteader promised to plant trees on 40 acres, a quarter of the land. Now, have a think to yourself, why would they want to plant trees? Ding ding, shortage of wood, ladies and gentlemen, from earlier in the video. So the idea was, plant your trees. Number one, the trees would act as a windbreak on the very windy plains. Also provide wood for the houses, wood for fuel, so you don't have to burn buffalo dung, you don't have to live in the sod house. By 1878, 5 years after the Timber Culture Act, another 16 million acres had been claimed for the land, for the homesteaders. So you could argue it was quite successful. In other words, was it a good idea? Answer, you'd better believe it. Sorry. But, there's always a but, ladies and gentlemen. Sadly, many trees died. They didn't take enough root. Remember, shortage of water, etc. Many trees died, apart from in the state of Minnesota. Also, some homesteaders took the extra land, 160 acres, but then sold it to the big landowners, which, if you recall from an earlier video, was not the government plan. Finally, 1877, the Desert Land Act. The settlers could buy 640 acres cheaply to encourage further development, further settlements, and this new law had some success. So we see the homesteaders, yes, they faced huge problems, but I've tried to show you in this video, ladies and gentlemen, quite a few of those problems could be and were solved. The railway, inventions, technology solved some of these problems and helped the Great Plains become more settled and more developed. Of course, as more people moved onto the plains, in some ways that created more problems. And the next video, we'll have a look at how more people, the railways, and the American Civil War all caused new problems on the Great Plains, particularly law and order. And we'll have a look at that in the next video. Time for me to have a drink? Perfect. Hope it's been useful, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you soon with a new video. All the best now.